Hey everybody, Larry Bailey here, Awesome Technologies, just making some final notes here before it started, and boom, we're live. It is April 16th, 2024. Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for coming. We meet every Tuesday, wherever I am in the world, at 4 p.m. Eastern, and we talk about everything happening in the community. I tend to have different types of community topics, and I don't know about you, but since February, it's been really bad to keep up with things. So one of the reasons why I found folks are having trouble keeping up with things is because they either have too much going on and it's hard to stay organized. That's generally me. They're overcommitted. That's generally me. And you're also doing some things inefficiently. And that's not generally me, but I feel like it has been that way over the last 45 days. And so I thought that today's topic of most common workflow review findings would be appropriate to go over, because these are things, I'm on fire. These are things that I generally find where it's kind of like, one of these days I'll get to talk with a therapist, and they'll tell me all the stuff that I do great for other people and I do crappy for myself. And so from a workflow review standpoint, I've been doing workflow reviews now really honestly since I got into mortgage industry without even understanding it. So back in '93, the workflow review that I did for the broker, I worked for PNC Bank in the tellers in the sorter operator area. And this is back when we used to do a lot of checks for everything. And so they have these huge machines. And so I figured out how to actually run that department the most efficiently ever in the history of the thing. And then I left there and got into mortgage processing for a broker. And I showed them how to go from using a typewriter to a Novell 5-user peer-to-peer network, and blah, 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 blah. And every place I go, it's always, I'm like, well, why don't we try doing it this way? Or why don't we try doing it that way? And so that's what I wanted this topic to be really about, is what is everybody finding that they're, if you find things that you're doing in your company, in your workflow, things that are inefficient, or you think they're inefficient, what do you do about it? How do you manage it? And then I wanted to share some of the most common things that I find when I interview other companies. And these are companies literally that are as small as 5, as large as a few thousand. Most are on Encompass, but not every company is on Encompass. The most recent one that I finally got completed was a large company out of California who's on the Byte platform. And to me, it doesn't matter. The most volume of workflow reviews I've ever done was when I was working for Ellie Mae, and I was the implementation project manager, and I was doing workflow reviews because I'm implementing Encompass, right? And so if you think about it, when you do a workflow review, we'll look at, if you ever bought a business, you look at the business, or you're going to create a business, and you're going to look at the business. Well, what's the best way for me to do this? You also do this if you're moving into a new house or a new location. You're like, well, how do I go from point A to point B? When do I go there? For me, everything is workflow related, which is kind of weird. I know, but for me, it really is workflow related, and the best practices for what you find works. Again, you might not even realize it, but when you're asking somebody like, hey, how do you beat the traffic? It's a workflow question. So anyway, that's the topic. And again, for those that are showing up today, thank you very much. If anybody has any particular questions, feel free to throw them in chat. And if you want to come up on stage and talk through your workflow, like, I really want you to challenge me. Like, you can ask me anything on what would I do for a particular workflow. I'd be glad to give you my thoughts on it. And then we'll kind of go from there. So feel free to use those as we go. And, and speaking of workflow, by the way, of course, in Encompass web settings, we have this thing called workflow tasks. That's where you can administer these things. You can use them in desktop, of course. But last year, when I really started promoting, starting to use Encompass Web and how do you use Encompass Web, I talked about workflow tasks a lot. I said, I've been telling everybody now for a while, 2024, you need to look at using Encompass Web settings for 4 main reasons. One of them is workflow tasks. And the reason why workflow tasks are so important is because it takes care of one of the most invasive, time-consuming, business-breaking activities that every single one of you on this call is doing. And if you're watching this replay, it's you too. And it's watching your Outlook. It's watching your friggin' inbox. I literally, 2 years ago, I did a time study to prove to the CEO of this company that the reason why the entire company was so lethargic was because they were all sitting in their email boxes waiting for something to happen instead of working out of Encompass. And I made 2 distinct changes in that workflow, and it resulted in a time savings of, it took about 3 weeks for them to collect documents from borrowers. It took them down to 3 days. And that change happened in the course of about a month. So, those are the Outlook problem is pervasive with every organization, hands down. Biggest problem you've got in your company right now for time wasting. And so the reason why I got on that tangent was because of workflow tasks. A lot of people will use Outlook. They get an email and they flag it, or you put it in a folder, or maybe you create a task on there. And guess what? Where that task lives, it lives in your Outlook. It is a siloed methodology, and it's really bad for business. And so what workflow tasks allows you to do is if you log into Encompass Web, if you go to Pipeline, there's 2 spots to go to on Pipeline Encompass Web. One is the pipeline of loans that you're used to seeing, and the other is it says tasks, and that's your pipeline of tasks. And so in one of the recent workflow reviews I did, a common finding was, again, this thing I'm talking about. And I said to the loan officer assistant, and I was talking with them, and I said, what's your biggest waste of time? And they said, getting people to do what I need them to do. And I said, you do that by how? And I email them. I said, great. Or I go see them if they're in the office. I said, great. How do they remember when they need it by? And she goes, I don't know. So I said, what if I literally showed her the workflow task interface. And I said, what if you could create a task in the loan file and you could assign it to the loan officer with the file, and they could see when it's due and what it is, and it's all there tracked. And she's like, when can I start using that, please? And so that's one of the things that I wanted to share with you when it comes to like workflow tasks. You don't need to use Encompass Web to use workflow tasks at all. You can use it in desktop, but it's a way for what I want you to start thinking about is, how do I get my team out of Outlook, which is the number one thing that I find in every workflow review, hands down. So Denise has a question. It says, when requesting documents from a borrower via the e-folder, can a custom Word document be modified by the lender during the process of sending it with a request? When the lender attaches the docs and the request allows for each signature, does a blah, 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 blah. So first of all, what I would say to you, Denise, is if you want to modify it before it goes into the custom print form. I think I answered this on a community thread once. So what you do is you create the custom print form with a modifiable text that you want them to modify, and make them type it in before they generate the document to be sent as a request. In that particular case, you have to create the custom print form with the mapping to the custom field, because when you make a request, you're not printing. Encompass is kind of grabbing it from the settings and it's sending it, and you can't intercept that for modification. So that's the reason why you're asking is, how do I deal with that workflow? You've got to look at how it gets created. So I've solved that by doing like what I said. Go into any custom input form and create a spot that says customize stuff you want on that letter. You make them type it in there as a requirement in loan form printing business rules to print that thing. And that way, when it goes out, it's it's there for you. So hopefully, Denise, that's helpful for you. Hopefully. Okay. I think I answered that question. When lender attaches a request. There's another question. When the lender attaches docs in the request that allow for e-signature, does the borrower have to save to their Encompass? So no, it's not. So the idea of e-signature is no. The idea is the workflow is it goes out to the borrower in a DocuSign envelope, and it goes, presuming you're using Consumer Connect, it goes to the Consumer Connect portal in a tile, a task tile effectively, that says e-signature, and they click and open it on any internet-enabled device that they logged in securely with, and they can tap to sign, and that should take care of it. So if that fails, meaning if it gets to the borrower and there's no e-signature, you need to make sure the document's set as e-signature in this e-folder settings within Encompass, and you need to make sure that the e-signing sticker in the custom print form is mapped properly. If it's a standard document and you're still seeing it come over as informational only, check to make sure the source is not EDS. If the source is EDS, look for an alternative version with e-signature sticker, because if that's not available, you're going to be kind of up a creek without a paddle. So hopefully it's custom print form. Make sure it's set to e-signature at the very, very bottom. Make sure the e-signature sticker is on there, and then do what I said earlier, and you should be good. So Candace says, if you're wanting the donor, you'll have to get creative with that e-signature, either with DocuSign or some other solution. So here's the thing with Candace. So Candace's comment, which is a great perspective, Candace, if you're looking to have somebody who's not a loan actor e-sign something, you can't use Encompass for that. Now, if that donor happens to be a non-occupying co-borrower, now you can, because they're in the file. But you can't use Encompass as an e-signature platform. It's not what it's made for. It's made for your borrowers and your non-borrowing owners. So yeah, you might have to get PandaDoc, by the way. I love PandaDoc. PandaDoc's a great alternative solution that's free and lets you do all this kinds of stuff very easily. So food for thought. All right. So Alec was number one. Hopefully that's valuable to you. The second thing that is in almost every single workflow that I come across is the lack of a way to leave constructive bidirectional notes to your team that's in the format of a log. Now you might be thinking that's a conversation log, Larry, to which I would say, no, it's not. You might be saying, Larry, we've got a third-party plugin, and I'd say, great, you're paying for that. What I'm talking about is when you've got activity between sales and processing, activity between processing and underwriting, activity between post-closing and everybody else. If you're using email, first of all, stop, because that stuff, first of all, needs to be in the file. Second of all, you can't report on that. So what I typically, find is I say to salespeople, or I say to processors, and especially managers, I'm like, I bring up the pipeline view and I say, tell me what's going on with that file. And they rattle something off. I said, now show me on the pipeline view, show it to me. And they say, what do you mean? I'm like, show me in the loan file. Like, I just started today. I now own this company. Show me in that loan file what's going on. And it's if they can, it's a convoluted string, even if they're using all different things. I've seen people use milestone comments. I've seen people use custom fields that are editable. I've seen people use conversation log. I've seen people use third-party technology. All this leads back into lack of continuity of conversation between the parties that should be talking, and lack of documentation and reportability inside your system of record. So that's the second big thing that I see in a lot of these workflow reviews now is making sure that you've got an easy place for people to enter a note and have it logged, meaning it's unmodifiable after it's entered. And you can put that up on a pipeline view so everybody can see what's going on, or a dashboard. So that's another quick creation, but it has huge impacts into how your team works. The more you can get your company to say, I looked in the file and I couldn't see the notes, like what's going on. What you're saying in an indirect way to the person you're talking to is, why aren't you putting the notes in the file? What's more important is, I'll answer your question in a second, Angie. What's more important is you're conveying this idea that, dude, if you just put the notes in the file, nobody would have to ask you what's going on. All right, that's the concept. So Angie asks, what can you do that with workflow tasks? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you can do that with workflow tasks, question mark. No. So a workflow task is, I need something from somebody and I've made the request, right? That's a workflow task. It could be an administrator saying, I need you to review the appraisal because the appraisal has been received in the e-folder. It's a workflow task, right? It could also be, Angie, I need that borrower W-2 from you that you said you would take care of last week, and I need it by tomorrow, right? What are we going to do today if you're not using workflow tasks? You're going to send an email, and then you're going to put a reminder, and then you might even put a sticky on somewhere. And then somebody else, you're not in tomorrow, and somebody doesn't realize, I'm not in tomorrow, and somebody doesn't realize you were supposed to have it by tomorrow. This is the idea of workflow tasks, is I need something from somebody by a certain time. That's different from a note. So Candace says a common solve for the problem that I was talking about is a custom form with sections for notes. True, maybe. I would just make sure, Candace, that if you're doing sections with notes, that you're creating two distinct parts of that with a button in the middle. And so the top part is where they type. The middle part's the button, and that button is a copy button to the log that's below, and it's the log that gets reportable. Chris says, to make notes viewable in a pipeline view, are you recommending custom field at RDB? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, Chris. And so what I can do is I can have all of my notes from a particular team in my pipeline views or dashboards, and I can see everything. Now, the bad part about the desktop pipeline view is you got to hover over it. And so this answers Luba's question. You just said, how much of that field can you see? You can see the whole damn thing. Just like if you've never heard me talk about adding conditions to the pipeline view, you can add all your PTAs, PTDs, PTFs, etc. But you gotta hover over the view. Now, it's meant to be a snapshot. It's meant to be a 2-second snapshot for that. Now, if you want that to be bigger, just run a report. Like if you really want to like study your notes, you want to see these things, if you want to use that, that's fine. Just run the report, and you can see all that data in there. It's there. It's just the UI won't give it to you. So hopefully that makes sense, Chris. And if anybody ever wants to see any of this stuff, like how you do it, or how do you do it, or you tried to do it, it doesn't work, just hit me up in the community and we'll talk through it. I'll show you how it's done. So talking about putting notes in is, again, another common thing that I find in a lot of these workflow reviews. And you guys are all going to laugh about this next one. Get out of paper. Your underwriters are working on paper. Processors might be working on paper. Your closers are almost certainly working on paper. And the paper they're working on is either a form they're filling in to review the file that they're looking at, or they print. It was like they won't let me take the printers away. I've got people with printers on their desks at home because they need to print. Now, the exception here, of course, is you might say, but Larry, what's the problem? I want them to be really quick about putting something on paper, because then they can just look at what they already have, and then they only need to put into Encompass what they don't have. And this is exactly the problem, because if you're going to be using the awesomeness of enhanced conditions, and yes, they are awesome, that means that when you go create a file, you can automatically create a list, not to be confused with workflow tasks, but a list of things that have to be in that file before the loan can be sent to underwriting, maybe even submitted to processing. Certainly before the underwriter is allowed to clear that loan to close. And so I've got folks, literally workflow review after workflow review after workflow review. It never fails, where I've got somebody taking paper and they put it on their desk and they do a checklist like it's 1999, like straight up. And then they'll take that information, all their notes, and then they'll transcribe to the file. Now, some of them will, if they've got scanners, some of them will scan that into the e-folder, which I think is great. That's a great end around to what's really needed. What's truly needed is a way for you to take a non-modal pop out that can be slid over and they take electronic notes, please. So this gets back into the logging concept, but imagine if you could go through and you could actually report on all the notes from your teams in a method to look for information within the notes if you need to, God forbid, or they're actually looking at the file and they can just go through and do their work. They don't have any paper. They don't have to scan. So Luba says, I have one department that won't move away from a checklist even though it's in Encompass. That's a training opportunity, and eventually that has to change. Candace says, what's really needed is the ability to make a second, third monitor tablet for taking notes. See, and I would say, Candace, that that's not what I typically find in workflow reviews. What I typically find in workflow reviews is the person who's doing the handwriting refuses to give it up, like what Luba said. I did an on-site for a banker out of New York, and the underwriter took out the 3 pieces of paper, like it's 1999, put it on the desk, and started doing a checklist. And I said, what are you doing? They're like, oh, this is how I take all my notes. Then I said, how do those notes and all that stuff get into Encompass? She goes, I don't want those in Encompass. I'm like, why not? She goes, those are my notes. I'm like, but they belong to the file. I mean, you're not here tomorrow and I want to see what your notes are. She goes, no, everything that's important is in Encompass. So how are you going to manage that? You manage it through policies and procedures at the company level, and your company has to decide if they want to allow that behavior or not. So Kirsten says, with our closures, I banned the phrase, I'm old school. They are all fully paperless. Now, Kirsten, I would love for you to share if you could type or if you want to come up on things, but so it was a mandate? Like it was the company that basically said closers either do it this way or it's been great working with you? Like, did it have to come to that, or was it a little bit more constructive? Jeremy says, is it possible to make notes a hard stop with each milestone? Kirsten, it's good it didn't come to that. I'm glad to see everybody realize the benefits of paperless. Jeremy, so it's really hard for you to talk about making notes because somebody could have put a period in there. So I wouldn't necessarily make it a hard stop with a milestone because then it feels very stick-based. What I would tell you is, or what I would encourage you to think about is, how do we create an environment for people to want to take notes, to create value? You can certainly create a checkbox that says, I've added all my notes. And you could do something like that to give constructive notice to the file and to make it like an obvious constructive action that they're done with their notes. But I don't think I'd make the notes section a hard stop. Kristen says, we have custom screens set up for them that make things easier when their old paper checklists were. I think that's great. Candace adds, that's what Candace did it at another company, several checklist screens. They loved it. So checklist screens is a great progression, and I'm certainly up for progressions. I would, again, encourage you to think about a checklist and what it is that they're checking. If the thing that they're checking is data and the data is in the file, it's really questionable. What are they really checking? If the check mark is I did something and that something's not related to data in the file, then, like I called the borrower or I sent the welcome email. Okay, fine. But the idea of a checklist, I would be, I would give you caution to that path because Encompass Web's UI is not really based on checklists. It's based on workflow tasks. And so loan program requirements, Candace adds, this is really a checklist. So condo checklists, again, are tasks, which is great. It's a great example of taking a checklist and turning it into workflow tasks. So not only can they have a thing that they did, but if the thing that they did is in reviewing an e-folder document, now you can have both of these side by side, and now you can give them some ease of use. And then also, again, you can, if it's a workflow task, you can see very clearly from the task pipeline view what tasks are still open on which files, if you really want to go there. Luba says, so how do you convert that checklist to a task list? Each item is a task in itself. So the idea would be you would take the condo docs. I don't know, verify condo is approved on FHA site. I'm just making this up. So how do you do that? You have to go to FHA's website and verify it, right? And so you can create a workflow task that defines that and actually gives them the link in the workflow task so they don't have to worry about keeping it as a favorite. And then you can make them document with screenshots or put something in the e-folder to complete that task. Check it out, Luba. Like, I don't know if that's a good idea for you or not, but again, from a workflow perspective, these are the things, these are the tools that I tend to talk a lot about with companies. And then, keep the questions going. So Chris is going to need a lot of coffee to convert our closers, massive checklists into tasks. So Chris, for you and for anybody else reading Chris's remark and going, nodding your head like, yeah, that's me. What I would tell you is start to look at those checklists as data. This is actually a perfect segue, Chris, because this is my last thing that I want to share. I can't stress enough, and I'm being sincere, there is a sincere lack of trust in most workflows. You've got person A doing the work, person B checking person A, person C checking person B, check. Everybody's, Chris saying yes, Luba saying yes. I went in this workflow review I told you I did for this other LOS. I went to the owners afterwards and they're like, how are we doing? And I said, you're paying 4 people to check the same field 4 times. And their response was, no, we're not. And I said, yes, you are. I could prove it to you if you really want to talk about it. And so there's a basis for this, guys. It isn't because it's not the people, it's the workflow. And Carrie just put on there, or checking the data that flowed from source A to B, to source B. It is about the source. So if you're using verified information can be from a verification source. It can be from the appraisal. It can be from title. When I say verified information, I'm talking about the information got into Encompass not by hand. It was done from data source. As an admin, you never thought you'd have to be a data modeler, right? That's not what you signed up for, among other things. But if you know you're using Encompass Partner Connect, which you will be by this time next year for pretty much all of your vendor services, if those vendors are pushing data into your loan file directly, what the hell are you checking? Like, stop. And all of a sudden now this checklist, going back to Chris's comment, this checklist of checking, making sure that the seller information matches title, making sure that the borrower, and all this stuff that the closers double check, not to pick on closers, but I was a closer and I know what I double check, to make sure everything is correct before I let that package go out. If I don't have to worry about this information because I know that it's locked down, this is what's happening right now. You want to talk about companies who are churning out thousands of loans a week? They're not double checking everybody else's work. The system is double checking the work. The system is doing it. So Luba says we ran into mistrust of the system. Some didn't fire right on the business rule, gets put on checklists and then check forever. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but ultimately the company's the one who has to set the rules and the procedures. And if somebody makes a mistake, remember, we're all human. I've made at least 20 mistakes today, at least. and we recover from that. We move forward and we do better tomorrow. So, so there's that. Kristen says, agreed, Luba, they have to buy into the stability of the data. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then Robert adds, a tight workflow and a well-documented process flow will keep the auditors away. Well, it will certainly answer the auditor's question. Linda says, I'm making a custom form checklist right now. Yeah, Linda, I'll reply back to your email after we're done here too. I'll give you that ETA. And then Robert says, try to keep off the checker, checking the checker. It's happening, gang. So hopefully, there's a ton of other common findings. If you really want to know how your company's wasting time and money in your workflow that you work your butts off for, go sit at someone's desk for an hour. And the trust but verify thing, like what Candace just said, trust but verify, it's true. In a lot of cases, some cases it's not even a trust. Some cases they're like, my name's going on that thing. I'm not the one that's going to be fired. And that's not even talking about the other people. That's more of a culture thing in the company, perhaps. It could be a personality thing that they don't want to be wrong. But if you go back 5 years when you couldn't breathe because of volumes, it's a different time right now. People weren't doing the kinds of double checks that that they're doing now back then because they didn't have time. Last comments here, gang. Squeeze them in because we're about ready to be done. Chris says trust will certainly be a big hurdle for our company. If someone makes a mistake, it becomes a big ordeal. I think people are afraid to make mistakes. I'm telling you right now, when I go through a workflow, the reason why I kick managers out of the room and I don't allow them to sit with me is because I want people to tell me what's actually happening. And that's the reason why the workflow reviews I do are I think they're second to none. I find out all kinds of cool stuff that save money, make money, and clean things up. So if anybody ever wants me to do a workflow review, typically I get them done pretty quick. Typically I get them reports back pretty quickly. And so we're certainly glad to help. If you just need to know what questions to do or how to conduct your own workflow review, I'll tell you what to do. You can go do it. It's all good. You guys be well. It's been 30 minutes. You know the rule. 30 minutes, get out the door, go back to work. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And stay well, be well. Enjoy the warm weather if you've got warm weather. And we'll catch you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.